I am going to be giving lessons here from this book. Christ Returns, Speaks His Truth. If you haven't heard this before, you're probably going to think it's pretty interesting. So this is the story of Jesus on the Last Supper, the evening of the Last Supper, and his account of what actually happened. So John was giving a vivid account of the story of the Israelites last night in Egypt before they escaped into the desert. He spoke of Moses' instructions to the head of each family to kill an unblemished lamb, to cook it in a certain way, and to paint its blood on the doorposts of all the Israelite dwellings, because that very night angels would come and slaughter all the firstborn children of the Egyptians and their livestock. With great relish, he recalled the outcry made by the Egyptians when they woke to find the bloodied firstborn in every home. None was spared. It was the kind of horrible story I rejected as having any value for anyone seeking higher spiritual truth. I wondered how much my disciples had really understood when I spoke of their Heavenly Father and His love for all mankind. How could they relish the thought of angels killing the Egyptian firstborn when I had clearly told them that God, the Father, was love? But the Jews had always been preoccupied with the shedding of blood to atone for their sins. Even Abraham, the founder of the Israelite nation, had been convinced he should take his only son into the desert and kill and offer him as a sacrifice to God, a pagan and revolting thought. I thought of the animal sacrifices in the temple. Loving all the wild things of creation as I did, the practice was an abomination to me. And now I was about to be put to death because I had dared to speak the words of truth. And when I considered how little I had achieved in passing on my knowledge, I wondered why I had been sent on such a mission. I felt a momentary spasm of resentment and anger, interthreading my usual feelings of love for these men. With some cynicism, I wondered what effective token of remembrance I could leave them, to bring back their minds to all my teachings when I was no longer with them. If they could swiftly forget all my teachings on the Father's love and enjoy the horrible story of the Passover while I was still in the room with them, how much would they remember when I had died as a felon on the cross, the most despicable of deaths? Then it came to me that since they were so moved by the shedding of blood, I would give them my blood to remember me by. With these ironical reflections, I took up a loaf of bread, broke it, and passed it to my disciples and told them to eat it. I likened the brokenness of the bread to the future brokenness of my body and asked them to repeat this breaking of the bread and distribution as means of remembering the sacrifice of my body to bring them truth. The truth about God and the truth about life, the truth about love. Realizing I was in a strange mood, they stopped eating, listened, took the bread, and ate it silently. Next, I took up my goblet of wine and passed it around, saying that they must drink from it, for it was a symbol of my blood, which would shortly be shed because I had dared to bring them the truth of existence. I saw that the edge in my voice had reached some of them. Soberly, each one took a sip and then passed the goblet to his neighbor. But still, they said nothing. They sensed I was in earnest and would not tolerate any more argument. Then I told them that a certain man amongst them would betray me. Privately, I understood his motives and knew that he was a necessary part of the future sequence of events. He was but playing a role which his nature had prompted him to do. I knew that he would suffer greatly, and I felt compassion for him. But these thoughts I kept to myself. When I mentioned that one of them would betray me, and I told Judas to leave and do what he had to do quickly, the disciples came alive, wondering if this really was their last meal with me. Now there was a great deal of emotional distress, questions, even recriminations for having led them into such a trap. Again, they wondered what they would do with their lives after I had gone. They asked what kind of standing they would have in the community if I were crucified. They would be an object of derision, they argued. No one would ever again believe a word they spoke. Deeply saddened by their self-centered response to my predicament, I assured them they had no need to fear for their own safety. They would abandon me and would not be connected to my crucifixion. After my death, I suggested they should disperse and return to Galilee. This touched Peter deeply, and he reacted, vehemently denying that he would ever abandon me. But of course, he did. All the love that I felt for my fellow men, all that I had longed to accomplish for them, in this moment of my own need, still met with blank non-comprehension, even resistance. Their only concern was what would happen to them. There were no words of kindness, offering of help, anguish for my future ordeal. How hard was the human heart, I thought. How many weary centuries would pass before mankind would be able to move beyond their own hurt and pain to feel even a glimmer of love and compassion for other unfortunates in a worse situation than themselves. And so, although deeply disappointed, even hurt by their selfish reactions, I also understood them and attempted to give my disciples courage to face the future and assured them that I would always be with them, even when I was hidden from their sight. The work I had started would be promoted from life beyond. I would not leave them alone. They would know and feel my presence, and this would be a comfort to them. I told them to cling to their memories of my time with them. I warned that there would be many who would continue in the knowledge I had given them, but there would be outsiders who would seek to add the voice of tradition and reason to my teachings. My words would be so distorted that eventually they would no longer reveal the original truth I had brought to the world. When I told them that this would happen, they were upset, even panic-stricken. I was relieved to see that my teachings had not been in vain after all. They had not entered totally deaf ears. They asked me to tell them more, but I raised my hands and said that was all I could say. At this point, I felt I had said all I ever wanted to say while on earth, that my speech with the men had been accomplished. All I greatly, deeply desired was to retreat into silence and to find peace and comfort in contact with the Father. While we left the supper room, I walked to the Mount of Olives, but the mood of my disciples was one of inner conflict, fear, and doubt. Most of them left to join their families and friends who would still be celebrating their own Passover. In the garden, there was a special boulder, shaped like a little cave. I liked to shelter in it from the wind, and so I sat and meditated and prayed, seeking a way into the exalted harmony I had enjoyed in the past. I knew that when I moved into attunement with Father Love, my fears would dissolve, and I would be in a state of total and absolute peaceful confidence again. And as I felt the power of love move into me and possess my human consciousness, so did the strength to endure what lay ahead possess my heart. I would be able to remain within the love and give the love to others to the very end. And so it was. So in today's practice teachings here, Jesus is talking about blood, and he brings this up several times in this book. There was a lot of old Jewish traditions about sacrifice and blood, and so he is speaking to that his disciples were always talking about blood. And in fact, if you were to look in the Bible, I looked it up the other day, and it's mentioned over 400 times in the Bible. But Jesus says in here, why would God want to sacrifice his own beautiful creation? So he was trying to break them free of these Jewish traditions and things that had been going on for such a long time in the churches and the temples and the belief system that was back then. He was trying to break them free from this, but they just weren't picking up his message that he was trying to get across. And now at the start of this, he was talking about John, giving that vivid account of the Passover and the death and the blood and everything that had happened. And Jesus was disgusted by this. He had taught them, he had told them that your words are creation, that you are creating this. And so to focus on these things, on these horrific stories and things that had happened in the past, just disgusted him and made him think that they weren't picking up the messages that he had been trying to get put across this whole time. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. There is many more where that came from. If you do not have this book, if you have never heard of this book, you can actually get it for free online. There is 9 letters that come with this book. This is Jesus' message now channeled of what actually took account in his life from his own perspective, from his own view. And Jesus said, greater things than I have done, you will do. And so I just want to ask you, have you done greater things than Jesus did? Which I'm guessing the answer is no. So the teachings that we are getting across from the Bible are not giving us what it is that we need to have here. And so in this book counts and tells you how Jesus created his miracles, how he did what he did, and gives an account of the actual teachings that Jesus was trying to get across. But because of Jewish traditions and the way that things were back then, people were just not open to receiving this message like they are here today. So I hope that you enjoyed this teaching, and I will see you at the next one.